This is Kevin Pruitt with another episode of Rising Tide Startups, and my guest today is Roger Lawrence. Roger, thanks for joining us all the way on the other side of the planet.
You are very welcome, sir. It's good to be here.
It's good to catch up with you again. Well, look at you, got tea delivered right on the spot. So you and I had talked, what's it been, maybe 6 weeks ago, and amazingly, I mean, there's 7.2 billion people on the planet, and my son-in-law, you actually said your wife babysat my son-in-law when he was a child. I mean, that is amazing that the world is so large and so small at the same time. But tell our listeners a little bit about Roger Lawrence.
Yeah, it's a long and potted story. So I'll try and give the short version. Born in the UK, grew up in South Africa, left South Africa in my early 20s to go and discover the world because the country had become claustrophobic for me. At the time, I'd been working in IT for probably about 4 years. I'd been a computer programmer on mainframes. I am that old. And I was also a sailor and a scuba diver, and I got myself across to the US. Turns out my biological father was an American citizen. He actually lived about 40 miles away from where you live now as well. That's another thing we have in common. And met him, spent about 6 weeks in the US and ended up in the Caribbean for a couple of years where I sailed, dived, worked as a barman, etc. The usual young person on walkabout things. Crossed the Atlantic, met and married my wife in East Grinstead, as you mentioned. At the time, she had 2 daughters. We had another 2 daughters. I got back into IT, worked in the UK for about 5 years, and then we migrated to Australia some 20 years ago. And I've been here ever since. I've had the fortune to work for companies like Atos, Compaq, Hewlett Packard. Compaq became Hewlett Packard, Microsoft, HP again, and I've started and failed a couple of startups. I've finished up with HP, became Hewlett Packard Enterprise while I was there the last time. And I was CTO for innovation for Asia Pacific and Japan in enterprise services. And just before HP Enterprise Services was spun off to be merged with CSC to become DXC, I left. I negotiated a redundancy. I'd kind of done my 30 years in corporate life, and I really wanted to make a go at getting an emerging technology startup happening. And the emerging technology that I chose was augmented and virtual reality. So in 2017, so just over 3 years ago now, or just on 3 years ago now, we started Achievr. Myself and my co-founder. My co-founder, Nigel, is from a health and safety background. So our company helps organizations solve their toughest training problems using virtual reality. That's essentially our pitch. We work both in virtual and augmented reality. And we've done everything from working in construction, doing mobile crane training simulators and signalman simulators, to food manufacturing. We've done big commercial deep fat fryers, to fast food retail. We've done burns awareness for Kentucky Fried Chicken, and that's what we do. So there you go. That's the
2-minute version.
The abbreviated version.
Exactly. Yeah, you went through about 40 years in a 2-minute span there. But so I asked you a question when we talked a few weeks ago that you clarified for me. So for our listeners, can you explain the difference between, say, augmented reality and virtual reality?
Yeah, and that's a very good question because a lot of people mix these up. Think of it as a spectrum. So we'll start with virtual reality because that's the easiest one to explain. Essentially, your eyes and ears are covered up by displays. So you're wearing a headset and headphones or some form of headphones, and you are immersed entirely in a virtual world. Everything around you has been programmed, and so you are entirely in a virtual world. Augmented reality on the other side, on the other side of that spectrum, is you're looking through a display, maybe your phone, maybe a heads-up display, and digital information is projected into your line of sight. Now, the thing about augmented reality is that this digital information, it can be something just like text, like a heads-up display that a fighter pilot would have, where they just see their aircraft telemetry. But nowadays, it's becoming far more sophisticated, and you can actually see virtual objects that respond to physical properties like gravity and light and shadow and even interaction in the real world. And so if we go from the spectrum, if you start on the one side where you've got augmented reality, which is just some form of text overlay on your line of sight, you go through to kind of a mixed reality where you have virtual objects that interact with the real world, into what they call augmented virtuality, where you have real objects projected into your virtual world, all the way through to virtual reality where everything is virtual. So, yeah.
I mean, I love the way you kind of explain the difference between those two, because it is pretty clear to me that, I mean, much more so even probably than the first time you explained it, because I think I have a better understanding now. But I'm curious. So you mentioned that you have done maybe training for, say, fast food places, like on how to use specific equipment and stuff like that. But I can imagine if you're using augmented reality, that there is the display that will show like the fryer and show your interaction with that. But is there, I mean, is it at such a level now that maybe you can wear gloves that you could actually feel, have some sense of weight and interaction, like a physical interaction as well? Or is it all just more of a visual interaction as far as augmented reality is concerned?
Augmented reality, you'd be using your hands. So you'd be interacting with real objects. And I mean, you could, let me take a step back. So the short answer to that question is yes, there are companies, there's probably dozens of companies, but there's certainly 3 or 4 that we're following with keen interest, who are developing gloves that essentially act as exoskeletons, I guess,
Right.
and they put forces on your hands. The most famous one has been interviewed by Dustin on Smarter Every Day. They're called haptics, HAPTX, and they even provide sensations of heat and cold. As you'd imagine, those gloves are very, very expensive, and they are tethered to machines because they have to be able to flow liquid through them, etc. But there are other untethered gloves that companies are producing, and they give you essentially the sensation of touch in your hands, as well as resistance. And so as your hands are both brilliant and dumb at the same time. And they're brilliant in as much as just the number of nerve endings that you have and the tension that you can feel on your muscles and ligaments, etc. They're dumb in as much as you can trick the sensors in your hands and the actuators in your hands to, especially when you're telling your brain something with your eyes, that the forces that they're feeling aren't actually forces from the outside of the fingers, they're forces from the inside of the fingers. So you can imagine some kind of elastic, I guess, pulling on your fingers as you try and squeeze. And in virtual reality, or with augmented reality, you're picking up a digital object, whether it's virtual or augmented, you're picking up a digital object, and if it was a ball and you had no tension on your fingers, it would be very squishy.
Right.
But if it was a steel bar and you had all this tension on your fingers and you're trying to squeeze the steel bar, and you can't because the force on the outside of your fingers is stopping your hand from doing that. And so the two in combination with each other give you the very real sensation that you're, and the thing with virtual reality, we do most of our work with virtual reality. And the thing with virtual reality is you don't actually need to have that much in the way of physical sensations to make people feel things. We use a system that uses controllers like this. And these controllers, so this is from the Oculus Quest, And these controllers, for those who are listening, I'm holding up Oculus Quest controllers. They're basically a controller for each hand, and they've got a couple of triggers on them and a couple of buttons on them and a joystick, etc. But inside is a little haptic motor. And it essentially gives a buzz or a click, and we can program it. There's an entry-level application, which is a bow and arrow. And between the creaking of the string and the very, very slight buzz on the controller, when you put tension on the bow and arrow, your body believes that you're pulling the string of a bow, and you actually get tired. Your muscles get tired from pulling the bow and arrow, even though all you're actually doing is separating your hands in space.
Is this like a magnetic technology of some kind, or?
No, there's no magnets at all. All that's happening is there's a slight buzz on the controller of the string that you're pulling, and a creak in your ears. And as you pull it, you can hear the string creak, and you can just feel this ever so slight. But that's it. There's no tension between your hands at all. And yet you play that game for 15 minutes and you are smashed because your brain
amazing.
Tells you. So there's a game called Richie's Plank Experience. We often use it in demonstrations to just demonstrate how one of the objections we get is that it's not real, or it's not photorealistic enough, that it's CGI. It's obviously CGI. Right. People have said it's very cartoony. It's not very real. And Richie's Plank Experience, you go up in an elevator opens, there's a plank at the top of this building over a city street. It's probably 50 floors up. And the objective is to walk out onto the plank. And even though people are clearly in an office with a virtual reality headset on, probably about 40% of delegates cannot walk out on the plank. They just can't.
It's that real.
It's that visceral an experience.
Wow.
And you don't need fans, to blow wind on people. You don't need, you can calibrate it to a real plank. So you can actually calibrate the program to a real plank on the floor. So people actually step on a plank, but you don't need to do that. Most people, or not most people, but many, many people cannot walk on the plank.
That is amazing. I mean, that just shows how real, your mind thinks that the experience is. It is crazy. This is a little bit of a segue here, but I went to a security training,
Okay.
And I knew it was fake. I knew the entire experience, whether it was kidnapping or being, confined in a closet or whatever they were doing to kind of, make this experience real. It took on such intensity, even though I knew the entire time that we were just being trained, that it was amazing and how real the experience was. Even when you knew completely that was not, the end of the next day, it was going to be over and you're going to be done with the weekend or whatever. But it was amazing how real that became just by being exposed to, certain external stimuli and that type of thing. So I imagine it's a similar story.
Everything from our mobile crane training simulator was the very first product that we did. And we've shortened the time that people feel comfortable operating a crane from, hours over a couple of days to hours or even minutes within a day. Because even though you're using virtual controllers, you are operating a crane and you are operating it. And so when you get into the real crane, you know how everything works. You've actually got muscle memory and how much pressure to put on different controllers so that you can slow the slew down, or you can, make sure that you don't shock load the boom and things like that. All the way through to, we're looking at doing a program for disability services for managing actual and potential aggression. And we have to be careful that when we program the application, the experience, that we don't actually give people PTSD. Because we can do that. we can totally make it so that somebody is coming at you with a knife or a gun or whatever. And it is real enough for people to actually suffer trauma in the experience. So we have to program these experiences with increased exposure and also decreasing psychological state afterwards, making sure that people are very aware that it's a training experience, that it's not, a real experience.
That's amazing. Do you see applications for like physical therapy or occupational therapy, is that a possibility of using an augmented reality for people to do therapy on their own type thing? I mean, if you can trick your brain into the sensation of drawing a bow, I can imagine you could do virtual exercises, things like that, that would be led to, do you see an application for that?
You're asking the wrong person as to whether I see an application for augmented or virtual reality, because I see applications for AR and VR all over the place, all the time. So again, the short answer is yes. The longer answer is a little bit more nuanced. We actually had this conversation with a client yesterday. They're looking at putting a new pie making factory. This is a client in New Zealand. And they were really questioning the value of, again, virtual reality training, considering the very few number of people they need to train.
Mm-hmm.
And so they were questioning that the value of VR versus just YouTube video, for example, or PowerPoint presentation, instructor-led training. And the value comes in three areas. This is kind of where we basically go. If it's really high cost, high risk, and high complexity, there's great opportunity for AR or VR. For virtual reality specifically, three areas of complexity. The first one is anything that you need to do that is practical, where you need to develop muscle memory. Could be operating a machine, driving a vehicle, going through some kind of process, as you say, some kind of exercise routine, responding to different physical stimuli, anything where you need to use your hands, your arms, your legs, move about and move in a sequence of steps that you want to remember. The analogy that I gave to the guy was, you could take Jimi Hendrix playing the guitar to you on video, and you could watch it for 20 years and still never learn to play the guitar, because you have to pick up a guitar and play it and get muscle memory in your fingers. And this is the same for, again, operating a vehicle, operating a machine, etc. So wherever there is that I am going to be doing something with my body in space with movement, and I need muscle memory, VR is much, much better medium for people to learn and to train, because they literally immerse themselves in the experience.
Right.
The second area is spatial orientation. So anytime you have to be aware of things happening around you, whether they're moving or still, whether you're moving or still, again, virtual reality is really good for that. And really, really good, because we just take the cost and the risk right out of the situation. You could learn to navigate a boat through a busy harbor without having a $50 million ship.
Exactly.
And all the vehicles in the harbor and everything
putting
else.
Other people
right?
at risk. Yeah, exactly.
Right. And so that's the second one. And then the third one is anything with interpersonal skills. This one's far more nuanced, but one of the things that we can do in virtual reality is we use an attribute we call alterity. We can actually put you in the body of someone or something else. So the example that I often use is if you're 6'4", even if you're doing role play, you will never look up to somebody. You will always be looking down to somebody. In virtual reality, I can make you 5'2". And instead of being a man, I can make you a woman. And instead of being Caucasian, I can make you African American. I can make you a 5'2" African American woman in a meeting. And suddenly you will have this awareness of how people ignore you, talk down to you, talk over you, and you can't do that. Even in a role play, you can't do that because you will always be that white 6'4" guy looking down on somebody else. And so those are the three areas: muscle memory, anything to do with muscle memory, anything to do with spatial awareness, and anything to do with interpersonal awareness. Virtual reality is pretty much the only medium that can overcome those things in terms of training. Everything else, even face-to-face role play, which has been the gold standard up to now, can't come close. When it comes to augmented reality, we can do things with real objects. So imagine something like fire extinguisher training. The problem with fire extinguisher training is you don't want to set anything on fire in your office. So with an augmented reality headset on, something like a Microsoft HoloLens or a Magic Leap, I can make a fire start in your office, in your computer, and you can pick up a real fire extinguisher, and I can make it so virtual foam comes out of the fire extinguisher nozzle when you pull the trigger. And so we can use augmented reality with real objects, giving you the feel of the weight and also the context of your actual office around you, and people and screaming and noise and everything else, and we can put virtual artifacts in place.
Be careful.
Training.
You may trigger my PTSD if you set my office on fire and have people screaming around me. So
well, there is that.
So yeah, I was laughing when you were saying, hey, I'm the wrong person to ask. I mean, it reminded me of that old adage that said, if you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. It's it's exactly the quote that came to my mind. But I want a real quick response on this one, because I've got a follow-up that I really want to drill down on, just really around kind of the COVID-19 and coronavirus and the current state of business. But I'm curious, just on a completely unrelated note, what do you think, let's dream 5 years from now, what are VR and AR going to look like in 5 years in your estimation?
AR is the dark horse of that discussion. We've been believing for years now that everybody's going to have glasses or contact lenses, and their world will just become augmented. So I'll start with virtual reality. So VR is really heading down the path that the advantage that we've had with computers for the last 50 years. Moore's law. So Moore's law basically states that, so Gordon Moore, the founder of Intel, he observed in the 60s that you could double the number of transistors on a silicon chip roughly every 18 months. Effectively, what that means is you can double the power of computing and halve its cost pretty much every year or so, year to 18 months. Right. And that's why when you look at coronavirus now compared to 10 years ago, if it had happened 10 years ago, we wouldn't have had this wonderful free video conferencing that we've been able to do. Everybody's doing Zoom meetings, they can work from home. That's all because of Moore's law. And so displays are going to get far, far more, they're going to have far higher resolution. As displays have far higher resolution, you increase your field of view. The processors are going to be far more powerful. So that means you won't need to be tethered to a big expensive computer. Already we have untethered headsets like the Oculus Quest. They will become smaller, lighter, much more powerful. Bandwidth with 5G, we're going to have bandwidth, not unlimited bandwidth, but practically unlimited bandwidths to be able to stream things. Of course, the computing power to recreate digital worlds will become far more powerful, etc. So I see virtual reality moving from expensive niche solutions like the training solutions that we do today, or becoming far more ubiquitous. And so you want to learn how to, I don't know, use a whippersnipper in the garden, and instead of going to YouTube, you'll just put on your VR headset and you'll actually pick up, or you want to buy a different type of ride-on lawnmower, motorbike, car. Instead of going to a dealer, you'll just put on your VR headset, you'll sit in your chair and you'll be in the car, and you'll be able to drive it wherever you want to drive it. You're on a racetrack, down a specific highway, in your suburban street, etc. That will become commonplace. And it'll affect the way that we do everything, the way that we connect, the way that we educate, the way that we transact, the way that we learn, etc. Augmented reality is also subject to Moore's law, but there are a couple of physical, literally laws of physics issues that we have with the way that our eyes work and the way that we see objects in space. And you've got all of the issues of how do you reduce the weight of a headset. If you look at the Magic Leap today, or you look at the Microsoft HoloLens, they're big, bulky headsets. They're not just your standard eyeglasses. And that's just because of the way that we form displays today and that we have to project on the eye. And with virtual reality, I'm totally enclosed. So I don't have to worry about light and shadow in the real world. I don't have to worry about whether there's a sofa there or a table, and to figure out where to put my virtual objects and things. So all of these things take computer power, and computer processors need to become much, much smaller and much, much more powerful. And we need to be able to dissipate heat, much better. And we need to be able to power them. And we need to be able to connect them. So you need radio stacks and things. So AR, the current word on the street is that Apple will probably come out with some kind of wearable augmented reality glasses, probably at the end of next year, 2021. I think when Apple come into the game, like when they came out with the iPhone and the iPad, it will totally change the industry. Until then, we're kind of limited to handheld devices.
Yeah.
And one of the biggest limitations for both augmented and virtual reality is content. Somebody needs to program the content, whether it's training, whether it's operations, whether it's purchasing, transacting, designing. We have to recreate. Already is. There's plenty of open source opportunities, and again, think of this like making a movie. When you make a movie, you scout a location, you do casting for your talent. You've got to get your crew, you've got to make sets, you've got to do, and it's pretty much like that, right? We have to create assets, we have to do rigging, animating, shading, etc. So it's a fairly complex process, and there's a lot of content to create.
It's just not the tech. It's just not working out the tech quirks. It's actually, developing the library that is going to support the tech. So I can't wait.
For our company, even what I don't need is just a talented engineer. I need a talented engineer who also understands about training and pedagogy.
Yeah.
I need a talented engineer who also understands about training, pedagogy, and business, and understands, being able to get business requirements. And, one of the things that we often joke about in Achievr is that we, if the company ever goes under, well, we can all drive cranes now, and we can make poppadoms, and we can fry chicken, because in the building of the software, we've just learned these skills.
Yeah. Yeah, you need to do like jet simulation. That's probably more lucrative than frying chicken at Kentucky Fried Chicken or something like that. But I'm really curious.
A couple of 100,000 people that fry chicken at Kentucky.
That's exactly right. Exactly right. I'm curious, just with the with the current pandemic. I can almost see, like, there's always sometimes blessings in disguise, of these difficult moments, and I can almost see that there's a possibility that the demand for your services would go up because of something like this, on the backside of this. But kind of, if we've got founders that are listening to this that are, you know, running businesses and they're, you know, they're struggling, you know, through this, kind of as a founder yourself, kind of speak to them and maybe give them just one or two quick points about, you know, how they can kind of leverage this difficult time a little bit, and just speak to them as if you're kind of giving them like almost like a hopeful hint, you know, of tips to kind of lead your team well through difficult times.
So the first one would be technology, and I would have really imagined that the vast majority, if not all, of startup founders are already cloud native. So being able to work from home rather than co-locating in some kind of accelerator or office, etc. From a technology perspective, they can probably already do that.
Yeah.
We, as a company, we've done that from the get-go. We've been working from home in a distributed fashion for 3 years already. So for us, when coronavirus hit and everybody was like, I have to work at home, well, we already did that. And the technology is obviously only a very small part of being able to do that. The biggest part is really culture and discipline, I guess. When you're used to all of your programmers or your engineers or your engineers and your design staff being in the same office, it's very easy for them to just go and jump in front of a whiteboard and rough something out,
Mm-hmm.
or to have a stand up in the morning and have a physical or even a digital board where you can shift tasks across. We've been doing this, as I say, for some time, and one of the things that we do is religiously we have a stand up every morning at 10:15 that caters for time zones, so that all of our engineers, no matter whether they live in Chile, as Animated does, or Malaysia, or the US, or anywhere around Southeast Asia or Australia, we meet every morning. It's like a normal stand-up, but we just do it over Zoom. We actually are testing out virtual reality meeting applications now as well, so we can put multiple people into a physical space with whiteboards and things in a virtual space. So I guess the culture comes down to, firstly, is the discipline. So keep your stand-ups. So keep having that. Make sure that you're using a digital tool that everybody can share, so that you've got information radiation. That would be the second tip, is just be transparent, be authentic. If you're going to struggle to pay people, have that conversation with them. Most people in a company, startup or not, respond negatively to no information.
Yeah.
And positively to bad information.
Yeah.
So now is not the time to be wearing all of the stress on yourself. How am I going to make payroll? Now is the time to go, we know what the situation is. Here's how we attempt to deal with it. It might be delayed. There's this government assistance, or there isn't government assistance, whatever it is, but have that conversation. Have that information radiation, not only for your technology that you're designing, but also for actually what's happening in the business.
As well. Yeah.
And then I just have a very small, I guess, trick that I learned when I was a manager in Microsoft. And that's just to start every meeting with a 2-sentence check-in. So everybody does what's top of mind for me professionally? What's top of mind for me personally? And what that does is it does a bunch of things. I actually wrote a blog post about this, but the first thing and the most important thing is it makes everybody present in the meeting with 100% focus, because they've had the opportunity to basically air what is taking up their bandwidth in the brain. And now that's parked until after the meeting. So everybody's engaged. It also makes the start of the meeting very snappy, because you're only allowed 2 sentences, no oversharing allowed. It also brings out the quiet people who wouldn't usually be sharing what's ailing them, because again, it's 2 sentences. Yep. Everybody gets to do 2 sentences. And as a leader for yourself, it allows you to understand where people are, where their focus is, because where your focus is, there your energy flows.
Yeah.
So if somebody's really, really worried about something at work, then it's good to know that, rather than just starting the meeting with your agenda and getting what you want to. It's just quick check-in every meeting, just what's top of mind, professionally and personally. So.
Well, I appreciate the way you kind of wrapped this up today with, just really some very pragmatic and, practical tips, for those that you put these into play tomorrow. I mean, if you're a founder, you could literally put these tips into your practice and procedures tomorrow. But Roger, is there anything that just really quick you want to mention to wrap us up today, and then just tell people where the best place to find you online?
Sure. Yeah, for me, I think it is a real temptation to think that things are going to go back to exactly how they were before coronavirus. And I don't think that that's going to be the case. I think that many, many organizations, if they survive, for those that survive, are going to come up with very real questions about, hang on, if 80% of my staff can work from home, why am I paying so much for an office? Why am I forcing people to commute? And even more nuanced, this person was really instrumental in making sure that everybody was working together, and so maybe they can have a different role or a slightly different aspect to their role. And the smart leaders and the smart managers are going to be thinking about those things.
Absolutely.
And so as a startup founder, think about, what is this future world going to look like when more people are working from home, when more people are, and everything for us, it's things like health and safety policies, ergonomic setups, technology help. This is where there is going to be huge amounts of opportunity.
Right. It's an endless list. For us, for the physical businesses, things like operations don't stop. Manufacturing is not going to stop. Compliance regulations don't go away. People still need to be assessed. So scrambling is probably not the right word, but we're certainly pivoting to being able to provide augmented and virtual reality solutions, so that companies don't need to have a physical assessor be flown out to all of their workers, so that companies can still do their physical compliance assessments, even though people are at home at the moment. Yeah.
In terms of getting hold of us, Achievr, spelled without the last E, so ACHIEVR.io, or go to our LinkedIn company page. That's how you get hold of us. You can get hold of me on the interwebs as Rog42. Just do a search for ROG42 and you'll find my blog, and you'll find my LinkedIn site and my Facebook site and Twitter and Instagram.
And some trail of the last 40 years of his life will be there in the interwebs. So
scattered in a digital format.
Maybe a motorcycle picture or two somewhere in that list. But
one or two,
I'm sure.
Yeah.
I'm sure. Well, Roger, thank you so much for just taking the time today. It's been a great kind of journey through almost like a virtual world, through our podcast today, and an augmented world for sure. But I just really appreciate you taking the time and just really sharing with our listeners, your background and kind of where things are headed, and really kind of how to drill down well and lead well in a difficult time that we're all facing during this pandemic. But just thank you again for just playing your part in helping all boats rise in a rising tide. Roger, have a great day.
Thanks very much, Kevin. You're very welcome. And it's been an honor for me to be here. I just want to acknowledge the work that you're doing by just lifting the voice of startup founders, especially in Australia. So thank you.
Well,
I
appreciate it. It's an honor to do that, and certainly a lifelong passion. So Roger, thanks again. Take care.
Awesome. Okay.